Zophres costumes. And Justin Hurwitz.
Yeah!
Amazing production designer and set. One thing I think I did want to jump right into, so I guess I'll start with you, Flo, and Anthony. I'll put you two on the spot. Something, listening to your interview stuff, I haven't heard much talked about is what we euphemistically refer to as the Friday Night Massacre. And to me, it's actually very enlightening on sort of how a movie like this actually gets made, once you sort of, do away with the sort of artistic niceties and philosophizing, you get into the sort of nitty-gritty, which is so much of movie making in reality, where you have to make hard choices and compromises, and you're faced with X number of things you want to get done, but they all have to fit into this box, or this little space, and you don't know how to do that. And one thing I just found amazing was how you guys, under insane pressure, somehow pulled victory from the jaws of defeat. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit, I guess we would talk about the end of prep, some of the issues we had, and how you guys saved the day on some level.
Wow, well, I remember the conference room. I'm gonna start with the setting. We were in Paramount Studios, and it was about 3 weeks, was it, before we started shooting? It was
I remember it being 2 weeks,
yeah,
maybe.
It felt very, very, very close to when we had to very much start building and prep and make hard decisions. And I don't remember the exact number, but it was like we need to reduce by a substantial amount. And it was like a triangle. It was a location department, art department, Damien, producers, and Linus.
Everybody.
Yeah, everybody was there. And, we just had to go through in detail and see what we were gonna carve out and really, really come together and say, this is what we're gonna do. We're going to not look 360 at this set. We're going to look 360 in all these other locations. We're gonna, not do the mural that we talked about for 4 months. And
What was the mural? I forget.
mural
I
in
can break my heart again.
in the exec's office at the Evo.
Oh, yeah.
And it's those moments where the Evo, it's a location that's a historical location in LA, and a lot of production shoot there, and you think, oh, we need to change it, and we need to do something different, but we're going to do that with the way that we shoot it, and having Linus in the room, and having, obviously all of us together. I think that's at the end of the day, it's all a collaborative art, so you can't make those decisions single-sidedly. And anyways, what we had to do was, really carve out a big part of our budget, at the Friday Night Massacre. And,
Do you remember what I told you on that day when we were in that room?
I remember.
Yeah, lots of memories.
I remember I played the same amount of numbers every week. And I go, if I win, I'm gonna give you all the money you need to make this movie. Because I didn't want to cut anything. And I think
When I heard you say that, I went, oh God, it is that bad.
I think that everything that we
We're
cut in
screwed.
Friday Night Massacre ended up back in the movie.
Yeah, except for the mural, apparently. No, it was this, I remember in a way this can kind of lead to, because the other thing I vividly remember, so our first week of shooting, so while this was all going down, again, a few weeks out from shooting, and we have this massive budget overage and have to figure it out, or the movie's gonna get shut down. The other thing that I remember was kind of adding to the pressure, especially in your guys' end, is that week one of shooting was one of the biggest sets in the movie. It's the kinescope when Margot first shows up. And, talking 360, we do a sort of big 360 camera move with all these different sets. That was week one. So I forget where you guys were in terms of actually building that at that stage. But can you just talk a little bit about that sort of, how you managed to sort of create this sort of entire studio out of nothing, out of a dirt field, Pyru?
I remember we were scouting for the battlefields, and we were out in Pyru Ranch, and we drove by a ramshackle bunch of barns and stepped out of the car and walked forward and saw for the first time a plot of land that looked like early Hollywood Hills, and it really just resonated, the feeling of what those early Hollywood studios looked like, of being out in the hot sun, of not having any other development. And I remember it was a big moment talking about the financial hardship, restraints that we had and the commitments that where we could spend money and where we could build, to say this is really important to our story, that we're going to be able to build this studio the way that you saw it, which was really land everybody in this environment of being completely surrounded by farms and orange groves and mountains, and not distracted by any other buildings. And so the way that we did that was through layers of research, of going to the location multiple times, of going back with Damien and Venus, and it was all timed to music. And so it was, starting with the first point of entrance when Nellie's getting out of the car, and then navigating her through the road, and then suddenly we see as she sees this whole discovery of all these sets, planted just in the middle of the dirt. And that was just a whole process. I think how you start to end to build something like that from the ground up is just constant conversation and discovery along the way. That I just remember we had so much of just responding. I always think of you respond to some image or object that inspires you and continues to inspire you. And we had looked at a completely filthy toilet that was in Nellie's apartment, or a circus character in the middle of a field that Mary and I would look at the imperfections of the set, the build, and you keep looking at these key images that continue to inspire you, and you build that world and you build those characters with the sets, and then you logistically have to plot out the timing of the camera moves, how those sets are going to be lit by the sun, by the build of each individual set. And so it just kept building and building and building, and we had a 12-week prep, and we started building that 6 weeks out from the first day of shooting. So it was definitely a race to the finish line.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think of that as one of the sort of big kahunas, sort of sets that you had to pull off. Mary, what's if you had to pick one sequence here that gave you panic attacks and nightmares? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
It was probably
one outfit. One.
It was probably the battlefield. Because
I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought one of the sort of parties or something with the. So it's just that number of.
It was the sheer volume and that was just it's just because also Damien wrote this amazing original screenplay that I'm sure will go on sale soon or something. You all have it was amazing, but he did write it in such great detail, and one of the details was there are 1,000 men on the battlefield.
That'd be helpful.
It was really helpful, but it was 1,000 uniforms, and we had
Not one less.
and we had limited resources. I mean, it was before the Friday Night Massacre, it was very clear that there was so much money that we could spend on each of these scenes, and so the volume of that was quite challenging, and just trying to figure that out. And but what's great about Damien is that he's extremely decisive, and we landed on the color and kind of this was available. We could amend that number by making our own and finding a way to do it in an inexpensive way by having a pattern and finding a very economical way to make the numbers that we didn't have, that we could rent from the beginning, but you made your decision, and then it was I remember Damien, very early on, before, this is we could make some decisions and pretend to spend money well before, right? You made that decision about what it was red against blue because he knew.
And he wrote a school script for that film, which was really inspiring on the whole plot of Blood and Gold.
But there was he knew it was going to be in your mind, you knew it was going to be on a parched field. And that's why you chose those. I mean, that's what you said to me, it'll be great on a brown or yellow, dry field for those two colors. And then he wanted pointed helmets. And you were like, oh, those will be funny.
I thought I was sending you like Alexander Nevsky, images or things like that. I remember us talking about.
Oh yeah, but then it became like, this is what we can find that, like, these are lower numbers than we need, but this is like, what do you think of this and what do you think of that? And then just the image of like,
those things colliding.
And
It's also flashing back now to like another instance where Flo, I feel like your department was kind of so ingenious with these sort of limitations. There was one big shot that we wanted, Justin's cameo, which I'll get to in a second, but it's a shot that sort of goes across the battlefield from these 1,000 warriors past the orchestra to kind of the behind the scenes, with people sort of running, and there's all these tents in the background. And the tents I love, it's like this added production value we had, but those tents originally were, we didn't, in my ideal head, it was just gonna be landscape there, but we had to, and I forget, it was either was it a heat restriction or was it a COVID restriction? There was
heat and bathrooms for the 900 plus extras.
Yeah, we all had to have, right, so tents because there was no shade or stuff there, so we had to have so when we get there, we're sort of scouting very shortly before shooting. You have your standard production tents, modern tents, which are neon blue and, very obviously modern and pretty hideous. And they're just kind of like occupied, and we're trying to talk about like, well, maybe if we get a tree, we should plant a big tree here, we'll obscure it, but it's so sad because then you're losing half the valley. And someone, I think it might have been you, Flo, just had the idea, well, they had tents in the 20s, why don't we just not have them be blue? I think they're probably more white in the day, beige, we'll just do that. So we got these giant tents in the background that actually technically we didn't even pay for, right? I mean, or we paid for, but we had to. Sorry.
and that was, it's just a number for me for the battle, but then, the Wallach party and Jack's party, because everybody ended up in the pool, and so that, most of that had to be manufactured, because they freak out if you put rental clothes in a pool. They do the rental, then
I
they
remember
just.
one of your worries with this film was how many outfits would be doubles and triples because of all the things that happen to outfits.
Yes, like how many times are we gonna puke? And that the puke can't get on anybody else at the party because that was just, it's just expensive, the multiples really cost a lot of money, but the volume in general is the scariest part. Did you sleep? I never slept on this movie. Like, I feel like I dreamt it, and I know I talked about it. I know I slept talk about it, because my husband was like, oh my gosh, you were just like yammering last night. Like, I don't know what I was saying, but I was sleep talking and dreaming about it. I dreamt about this movie every night.
What I still marvel about, is, because, especially thinking of you as the brilliant costume designer you are, you're so, there's so many impossibly glamorous outfits both in this movie and all the numerous films you've done, that we've done together, that you've done with so many other directors, the Coen brothers and Nolan, etc. But the image I had in my head, I feel like you were always wearing one outfit. It was you in these sort of overall jeans, and you had crutches on because what, did you broke maybe sprained your leg or something?
No, I had hip replacement surgery the day I figured out.
Right, but so the hip was needed to be replaced during the whole thing.
Yeah, I couldn't put weight on my leg, and I discovered that.
Yeah, so we're like shooting these rugged terrains with like 1,000 extras that you're dressing, and of course like Mary likes to kind of go to every individual extra and make sure that the seams are right. Time we kind of like look around, who's that crazy woman? Oh, that's Mary. Yeah.
It's true.
That's what I love about it.
Insane. Totally insane.
Justin, how did you enjoy your cameo on the battlefield? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, that was brutal. It was brutal days, 100 degrees. I was more worried about the musicians because I could run back to the tent between every take, but they had to sit out there. And we had some like umbrella system worked out. We were supposed to run in and out with umbrellas, so we were trying to get the timing right, but we never really got the timing perfect on that. So we were just like hiding water bottles beneath chairs. I remember they were running out putting fake dirt on my face.
Oh, yeah,
Dirt,
you looked too clean.
dirt in my teeth after the first couple takes. I remember you saying I looked too clean. So we were doing the dirt. Yeah, it was just hard days.
And that was in a 100% wool suit that we put you in.
3-piece, we'll see. Thank you.
And seeing you next to Flo, it's making me remember all these conversations we had of like leading up to both that scene, but also, I mean, the number of scenes, obviously, there's many with orchestras, bands of various sizes. Most of this being music that you're in the process at that time during prep of composing for. Just like what can you walk through a little bit, sort of, I'm interested in how sort of you're in this kind of vacuum creatively, making the music that you feel like will sound and feel right for those sequences in the film. But then whenever it's diegetic music, Flo and her team are having to figure out how to make that real, how to find exactly the period instruments that will play that, how many musicians are we talking about, Mary has to dress them. So it's all the logistics that come out of what you're composing. Can you just walk through a little bit of sort of that process of sort of once you've decided on a piece of music, kind of how those sort of discussions went for something like whether it's the battlefield or the Walled Party, let's say, or in the studio band.
Yeah, I mean, we were on calls all the time, I remember, during prep, and we're interacting in a way that music department composers aren't used to it. I think you guys probably aren't used to it, but this movie really required us to all collaborate on this stuff. So I was, arranging for the bands and for whatever the ensembles were, and then you guys were calling me to talk about what the instrumentation needed to be, and
I remember early I was suggesting I don't know where the instrument, where the drums go, where the strings go, walking through it, and it was just like, obviously, this it's part of your DNA, and it was just like, we just have to get that right. We have to make sure that the trumpet goes, and everything was also storyboarded by Damien, so specifically of where the camera was going to land on Sydney, or the piano player, and so we just knew we had to get that right, and I just know too, I don't know, if you don't speak with the collaboration with Gabe.
Well, yeah, with Gabe Perella, the prop master, is that it was constant conversations with Justin to figure out, because he knew what the music was in each scene, that we had the right instruments on camera, that the music that was being played was the right instrument that we were dressing into. So yeah, it was constant, like, way before we even started filming.
yeah, and you guys were so detail oriented. I remember, you had questions about music stands and you sounded the chairs and the music stands, making it all right. And then I told you guys this last week, I don't think you knew this, but way later in post-production, I ended up going to the prop house that you guys were using, History for Hire, because you had a couple of guitars on set in the bands that were they looked so cool. They were these tiny little wooden guitars, and with little inlaid wood. They were just beautiful, but they were also just like small and old, and I just felt like they had a cool, crunchy sound to them. And we never heard them on set because they were miming along the music that we'd recorded already, but I just felt like it would probably have a cool sound, so I went to that prop house and I got that. I actually got 3 of them. I got 3 of the guitars that you guys had used earlier, brought them all to the studio and had the session guitarist try them all out, basically as options on a song, and 1 or 2 of them ended up being just like so unique. So, because these session players who come to the studio, usually they have like new, pristine, perfect equipment, and these were these old, vintage little wood guitars that just had like a sound that were. Did you know that when we got this? When I rented those guitars?
I knew you would, that some of the instruments that actually wound up being used in post were from History for Hire.
Yeah, exactly. They were the same ones that they had found earlier.
Yeah.
They're here tonight, actually, the guitar.
Really?
I brought it here, yeah.
Wait, where? Oh, you actually.
That's so cool.
Oh, that's cool. So someone will play it.
Yeah.
Justin's gonna have a concert.
Justin, so then on that note, like what, because obviously you're writing a score here that's, again, largely dictated by diegetic music, but also, of course, it's going off in its own entirely other direction for the underscore in many cases. But, you're working within the parameters of a period, but we also talked a lot about not wanting the music to feel overly confined to that period. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about, like, the early days when you're just sort of sitting at whether it's at the piano or just thinking up melodies, how much are you thinking about the sounds that eventually will express these melodies? The sort of those kind of unique period sounds or non-period sounds, and how certain guitars have been playing, or all the kind of things you wind up spending a lot of post on. How much is that sort of dictating things early on? How much is it entirely separate? Where are you if you just trace your journey from composition to actually figuring out how these things sound?
Yeah, I mean, these are our earliest conversations. I remember talking about influences, and you made a playlist at one point which didn't have had a few 20s tracks, but mostly it was much later stuff. There was some rock and roll in it. There was some more modern dance music in it, and we talked a lot about those being influences structurally and in terms of giving us the feeling. Even from the very first song, Welcome, we have 3 layers of Gary Novak rocking out on the drums in a way that it's not 20s at all. It's much more rock and roll, and that was something we just sort of came to. It was early on, just talking about what we wanted to feel from it. Straighter beats, real riff-based music, real like the kinds of riffs you have in rock and roll, where it's sort of a repetitive sort of mode of driving the whole thing, using that as the underpinning for a song, which is not really what they did in the 20s, but we said, well, we could take a 20s band, have an entire horn section play the kind of riff that you might have on a guitar in a rock and roll band. Structural things like using horns, using the instruments from the times to create the kind of risers that you have in dance music, the rise and rise and rise and rise, and that you get thrown into a drop. So those were the first conversations we had. Then we just started demoing, and then making demos while you were storyboarding. You were storyboarding sequences for some of the band stuff, but also for other. Like I remember when Manny's racing to get the camera over what the track that we call Herman's Hustle. That sequence highly storyboarded.
Why do you call so many tracks Herman's something?
Because my grandfather was named Herman. So there was a Herman's Habit in Loveland. There was a Herman's Hustle. He was a saxophone player. I never knew him. He died when I was 1, but he was like the musician in the family, so I've been naming tracks after him for a while. And I got it nice.
Okay, so you're doing, and yeah, because certainly I do remember these conversations talking a lot about dance music, rock and roll, etc. But then there's also these, then the irony is like some of the longest, most involved pieces of score in the film are really much more in the symphonic classical tradition. I'm thinking of like the Hearst Party. That's like a 10-minute stretch of single stretch of music, entirely symphonic. The Hilltop cue when they kiss, things like that. When you're composing those, were you thinking of this as total counterpoint to the sort of raucous party material of the movie? Were you thinking that these things were in dialogue? Were you trying to kind of unite them in some way, even when you're doing this more self-consciously classical stuff, so that it all feels like one movie or one style? Or did you treat it as sort of in yin and yang and try to have contrast be the thing that dictates it?
Yeah, I mean, instrumentation-wise, style-wise, huge contrast, but we're always coming back to the same tunes, the same melodies and themes. So we pretty much plant all of those melodies at that first party, and then we keep coming back to them over and over again. So for example, like the morning cue, when everybody wakes up and you're sort of seeing where they're morning, it's sort of in the style of classical music. It's very sort of Schubert-inspired piano trio, but it's drawing on the dance that Lady Faye does at the pool party. It's the same melody as that. We're connecting to that theme. The kiss on the hilltop, very Wagnerian, very Tristan and Isolde, but it's Gold Coast rhythm at the heart of it. The melody is Gold Coast rhythm, and then I orchestrated it very Wagnerian, but that is the theme. It's the Jack. It's the theme that more or less belongs to Jack throughout the movie. That's the DNA of it. And then the Hearst Party, that's kind of its own thing. It's very bolero inspired, obviously. Structurally, it's very bolero with the growing and growing and growing, and the snare drum underpinning it. It's our tune is the new tune, And we wanted to sort of function a little differently, not be a straight shot from small to big to hit a couple moments, then going up the stairs and coming down the stairs. And also we wanted, I remember we talked about a melody that would dip in and out of back and forth between the pleasant society of the party and then this kind of these sort of creepy, unsettled feelings because all of our characters are feeling like really out of place and kind of creeped out by all of this. So we're constantly going back and forth in those woodwind melodies between sort of just pleasant Americana a sort of feel and then into this weirder feel back and forth as it grows and grows, hits a few beats, and then explodes at the end into just total mayhem, working towards, when she tells the joke and throws down the rabbit.
Yeah, I'm just like, so, just thinking on that sequence, for instance, Flo and Anthony, so there you've got the sort of epitome of, in terms of the range of the movie, of sort of, polite, high society, sort of everything kind of pristine. But then I'm flashing back to what you were referencing, the toilet in Nellie's apartment early in the film, and that as a sort of linchpin, whatever image you found, some toilet from the 20s that was horrible and just got us going. That's kind of the range a little bit. Is one easier or harder, than the other? The sort of trying to kind of do the, let's say sort of period glamour at its finest versus the sort of texturing and weathering that you have to do to make things look filthy or lived in. This movie really kind of, I think we talked a lot about it, sort of bouncing back and forth between those two poles. On costumes as well, it's sort of, I don't know, I just wondering if you could talk about whether, how you sort of broached that and whether one is easier than the other or not.
I mean, I think it was really very clear that we wanted to tell that raw story of these characters. And I think doing texture and like decrepit, I love it. So just in general, anytime you get to do like just filthy anything, I think just you get really excited. And then it's nice. It's also nice to get out of the 118-degree desert and step into Jack Conrad's and have a breath and be surrounded like in the hearse party. But I think building those characters and telling that realistic story, that was always the really exciting part of this process for me.
I think it's always a little more of a challenge to do the squalor. Jack's, you just make it nice, the nicest things, but the squalor part is a lot of character, and that's usually kind of harder. The Counts, Nellie's, any of those sets, they're funner. They're almost like funner. I don't mean that because they're equally, but it is, it's a little more of a challenge to get it right. The squalor.
Yeah, and even early Kinoscope, I think, as that ragtag, which I always love, that, when Nellie gets there, you think that she's on the reverse stage set, and it's going to be this glamorous experience, and it actually was based on these Pottery Rose studios, and something that you took up, liked very early on was the use of color, and we were looking at how this individual sets that were being shot side by side because they weren't shooting sound, so be in this kinetic ruckus of shooting and stealing actors, stealing set pieces and using them side by side, but that within each set that they were using strong sensitive colors and that they were jewel boxes. I remember that they were set within this desert, and that really stuck with me throughout the whole film of creating the contrast of each character and finding the storyline in the color and in the character of thinking of Eleanor St. James and her red office and setting her back in the Victorian era, like she's already in the bygones, and really sculpting each of these characters, and inspired too so much by circuses, and then listening to Justin and Q&A talk about that inspiration in music and looking for instruments, looking for those imperfections to add, to take the edge off of the period, because like you were saying earlier too, Mary, we just weren't trying to create this pristine version of the 1920s, and really look at how the story would visually feel as if you were sitting there in the sun. So just that contrast is really important to understand.
Yeah, and Mary, on your end, just similarly, like, I definitely remember lots of, conversations with you of how can we get these outfits filthier and dirtier, sweatier. But again, to me, it's like in my mind, the movie was always, we talked about this a lot, always had to hinge on that somehow juxtaposition in a way, even within a frame. And I just wondered, sort of feeling the glamour and that idea of the beautiful people, moths to the flame, why people want to be a part of this world, but always feeling the sweat and the dirt.
Yeah.
If you could just talk about.
Even
how
when
you pulled
they
that off.
were sort of in sometimes glamorous clothes, just making them feel layered and dirt, and because they were oftentimes walking in a somewhat glamorous outfit through a dirt field to get there. So we, I think I agree with you guys that the more challenging thing is the aged and the more character driven, and because generally you're building everything, so even the pieces that are meant to look dirtier and more lived in and more used, you built them to begin with, and then the added layers of the aging and the dirt, and so it does in the end, it's more challenging, and it's more interesting because with each layer of dirt and with each nick and scratch, and you're just adding more character, and it's more fun than leaving it pristine, and that was the greatest challenge of the movie because
Every time you read a page in the script saying elephant shits on this person, yes, thank you, Damien. Right, next one, hear that.
Because we got to work on perfecting the elephant poop and like trying to figure out how we could make our poop look like the special effects. There was like trays of it in the aging room,
Trays of what?
our poop. Like we did not we didn't do real poop, but like we made and we were comparing it, we didn't match.
Trays of fake.
Like plates of it. So that we compared to but the special effects. You didn't know that? We had to
What were you
make
comparing? I'm so confused.
what was coming out of the visual special effects in the rig.
Yeah.
And hours that we were laying on the elephant wrangler and on Manny needed to match. We shot it out of sequence. But literally, I remember this, the trays, it's not trays, they were little Dixie plates. Was literally next to different shades of pink that were hand dyed to make the frog closures on Lady Faye's pink Shingo Zen, which I know I'm saying wrong, but her traditional Chinese dress that she wears to jets. So you would get, it was the story of the movie, in my costume shop, side by side, constantly in the costume shop would be and that dress, and she looked so fabulous, and it was made to order to fit her, and literally the frogs were all handmade, every garment she wore was handmade,
Probably the most gorgeous dress I've ever seen in my life.
The pink one,
The pink dress.
It was next to him. And but but those, so that to me was yes, we said the character building and the aging is always more challenging. It's harder. It's literally physically harder to do, but it is more fun. But what was really amazing about this project is that those things were stick side by side, and the ability to do. But we even had to age that pink dress. Do you remember that? We had to age it because we shot post snake fight before the party, and so even that had to have multiples, and we had to. So there was this pink dress, and the first time she wears it ever was at Kinescope after the snake bite.
Yeah.
And so
Actually, right, that scene got cut.
We had to dirty it. It was so sad, but we had to do it. We had to make it dirty because she literally killed the snake and sat on her knees, and they, had that fabulous kiss, and it was going to be in the desert, but we shot on sequence, and so that's what happens all the time. And but again, that was the most, it was the hardest and the most fun part.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I think, so I want to just ask one departments in a way. That we haven't really talked about is choreography, and I would just talk specifically about the wallet party, opening party, because it was the sequence that we were trying to use to set the tone for everything. But it's also the sequence where I remember the most. Costumes having to be so largely dictated by how people would be dancing, which of course is dictated by the music. But the dancing and movement as well is dictated by the set, the props, how everything looks together, how various costumes will look against the color walls that you guys were doing, what the music will inspire people to do movement-wise. If we could just, I don't know, just sort of throw the baton, just wallet party, kind of take us back to some of the earliest discussions you guys remember about conceiving what this party was going to look like, what kinds of costumes we were going to see in it, what kind of music we were going to hear, what it was going to be.
I mean, just starting from the ground up of reading the script, this unbelievable sequence that was very specific of, you know, this three-tiered space with cathedral ceilings and gilded age meets Gothic castle, and we were just really, I just remember the first challenge of going, Damien and I talking of how are we going to do this? Are we going to build this, or are we going to find this on location? We were scouting for film premieres, and we went into the 80s Theater in downtown, known as the United Artists Theater, and we really were drawn to the layout of the space, of how tight the walls were to get that feeling of the crowd and the all the dancers, that they would actually be able to be shoulder to shoulder. And I remember we spent a lot of time talking about the extras count, that a lot of people would say, like, there's no way that was over 200, and no, we need 400, and we'd have 3D models just for people to see how many.
It's one of those little, it sounds intuitive, the things you kind of learn as a director early on, that if you want something to look like you have a lot of people there, make the space small. and you know, often I remember you would be doing these sort of mock-ups with bigger spaces, other locations we were looking at, and just in terms of the number of extras we could afford, it just would not have had that claustrophobic sort of sardine can feel.
And then, I mean, you know, we just broke it down from there of, you know, the whole design process of turning a theater into a ballroom, of course, and, you know, what Don Wallach's meant of being this studio producer who, and his idea of fame and fortune, that and something that you always talked about, what is the thing that's the furthest that you would imagine building in the desert in Los Angeles in 1926? And it was that big, red, beautiful bedroom that we start with, and then a hallway that, you know, leads you into the ace. But we were always concerned, is this gonna be a workable space or a crew for the camera movements that we were trying to do? And we ended up taping out the entire area in a dance hall rehearsal room at Paramount about 4 weeks before shooting, and that's when Mandy Moore, a choreographer, and that their troupe of dancers would rehearse and go every day to see the choreography. And then a big part of it was the stage. And it's very small, and I think we all envisioned it maybe in a different way, that it would be this grand, you know, band in the center, or a large part. And really, because of the space, they were kind of pressed underneath the mezzanine of the theater. But it actually kind of was a great discovery in the end, because it was this kind of fourth wall that was always the music. And so, you know, sometimes you start thinking of something one way, but then working on location leads you to a different way. But it was that big collaboration too, when Lena's came to scout, how we're gonna move the camera, coming with the Cam rig, which was a camera on a wire that starts low, looking at Manny, and then travels up and back down into Sydney, and then cuts to the sequence. So a lot of navigation, like a lot of departments.
I just remember ordering more balloons every night.
I think I started with like 15,000 balloons, and I think we're maybe 80,000 by the time we finished shooting. I remember every night calling the lady, please can you just deliver 15,000 more balloons tomorrow at 6 a.m. And more streamers, everything was like more. I mean, I remember reading the script, and as epic as that party was, like, when you read the script, you're like, wow. Like, I just remember, like, and everybody, you know, everybody on my team, when they started, when they reading the script, was like, right away, I'm like all in.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you always went to the script down there filming it, and it was as wild when they were filming it as it is in the movie. The energy in the like, and I remember, I told this before, but me and Flo were literally up on the third balcony throwing streamers in the balloons. It was like all crew just to get those shots, and it was just a cool party. I mean, that was just a cool part. Everything about it was just reading the script, filming it, and then you see it. And I remember the day that we were the first shot, the spider cam shot. And you rehearsed it for like 3/4 of the day before you finally got it right, the way you wanted it. And once you got it, once you saw that shot, you're like, oh my god, that's so cool. So yeah, Wallet's Party, what a great scene. I mean, all of it. Just
when it comes to the choreography of the music, I think that was the question. I remember just trying to structure this, trying to get the timings of the demos right. That was kind of the first thing. Asking you lots of questions, working on demos, working on the bridge of what the welcome song or a sax solo in Voodoo Moment. You say no, it has to be 3 seconds shorter, or that solo has to be 2 seconds longer, because you had these shots in your mind and you were working on.
But did you have the idea of, I forget, because one thing I love that you do with the score is that, and basically every melody in the movie is seated and established in the Wallet Party, that you wind up then sort of building variations on for the rest of the movie. Was that, I forget, was that sort of part of the agenda right away, that you would begin the structure of the score with this party, and kind of like we do with the characters, introduce every melody, or did that come a little more?
No, I think that was the idea. I mean, that's why we started. We wanted to tackle that party and sort of pick off all 6 or 7 of those pieces, knowing that we could come back and draw on them. So that's why we spent so much time on those pieces. Like I said, batching the choreography, and then so much of it was then getting the energy, just adding so many layers to that music to get that energy that they were talking about. And a lot of it was percussion. Well, a lot of it was pushing the music. First of all, you kept talking about a train going off the tracks. You wanted things to almost feel like they're going off the rails. Going off the rails was a phrase you were using a lot. So I remember pushing the bands in the studio to a little faster, kind of accelerating, adding layers and layers. We'd bring in lots of percussionists. We'd bring in, after the drums, we'd bring in groups of African percussionists, groups of Latin percussionists, and then just weird things I was adding, like metal bucket. There are a couple of these things where I wrote just in the score metal bucket. I wrote at a different tempo because you wanted again the feeling of things kind of falling apart. So there's one track where it's 140 is the tempo, and then I wrote in the score quarter notes at 94 BPM on a metal bucket, just dun 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 dun, and there are lots and lots of layers of stuff like that going on. Also, things.
One of the just a recording sessions, one of the unexpectedly hardest things to get genius level session musicians to do is to play badly, to play sloppily, can't give them the direction. Like, you guys are drunk out of your minds. You've been playing for 6 hours and you can't keep a tempo straight. I remember you had to do 30 takes just to get to a bad enough version of the I think it's Gold Coast Rhythm when they're playing it with the guy with the horse.
Yeah, the morning after, when we dissolved from the end of Voodoo Mama into the morning after Gold Coast Rhythm. Yeah, it was a nice arrangement and it sounded beautiful and I was really happy with it. And then you said, yeah, but they're all drunk and hungover and barely awake, so that doesn't sound right. So we had to tell them to play drunk. Then I remember they started playing, it was like a cartoon. They were just sliding around and the trombone was comical and it was all ridiculous. It was all ridiculous, so we had to calibrate it and we had to, but it was a hard thing to do because they're used to playing perfectly. That's these professional studio musicians or club musicians. A lot of the players actually had total tangent, but we wanted players that came from outside the sort of the studio world. It's about half and half. People who just play at clubs or smaller venues and just sort of don't have that film music sound. We wanted at least half the players.
You found who normally play subways, right? You found videos of
Yeah, not anymore. So there's all the lead
Sounds more
baritone sax, all the lead baritone sax. Do 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 do. That's played by this guy Leo P. or Leo Pellegrino, who he had these viral videos 10 or 15 years ago in the New York subway, dancing while he plays, kicking his legs, spinning around. He's got a band, Too Many Zoos, which is a really great band. And yeah, it sounds like people know him. You probably knew it was him just hearing the Barry in the movie, because he is one of a kind. He's got a tone on that baritone sax and a way of playing it. And we were demoing again early on, back to the demo days, with a virtual MIDI sax, doing dance music on a sax, and I just went searching who plays dance music on a sax, and there's this guy who does exactly that, literally dances while he plays sometimes. So yeah, Leo comes from totally outside the film world. Jacob Sesney, who played a lot of the sax solos at the opening party. Again, we saw cell phone footage of him playing at a little club in LA, but just wailing on the sax and just doing things that just unique, one of a kind. He's a one of a kind artist. So brought him into the studio. A lot of musicians came from. We saw them on YouTube originally, or the contractor sent them to us from really outside the film music scene. So it was an exciting mix of a lot of the players we work with and a lot of new voices in the studio. But anyway, what was I saying? We were talking about the drum. Yeah, so encouraging them to be getting the wildness out of the players.
Yeah, speaking of wildness, Mary, you talked about the costumes a little bit. And that scene.
Yeah, the wallet party was a huge challenge, but a lot of fun. And we started with just finding inspirational research, and there were things that we found that we loved that we decided to make specifically for two, in fact, that I remember specifically. One was the chicken that we made. We made a handmade
The chicken suit.
chicken suit, and that's based on a really wonderful photograph from the 1920s of a guy in a chicken suit. And it was part of Damien's Bible and part of our photo we did like inspirational photo galleries or albums, and we shared them. And so that was one. And like the Spider Girls, we made these spider outfits, and there was like a dozen things that we ended up, more than that probably actually. And what we realized was that there was a lot of things that we really loved and wanted to use in the wallet party that didn't exist. And there were some things that we found out in the world, and we did just a lot of resourcing all over the globe, like from Europe, and even we got things from the Middle East, and we got things from all over the United States, and we had vendors that I reached out to even the year prior and just started gathering like photos of what was available. And some things came to us and they were completely disintegrated, and some things came to us and they were great, and then other things we ended up building. And we started building very early on and creating this album of like these costumes that we would use at the wallet party. And then we kind of realized like, okay, we have about 400 people roughly, and that some of them would start to undress, and then we needed also clothing that we manufactured and we made for the dancers, because they were dancing vigorously, and we saw all the rehearsals, and we had the good fortune of our dance studio was like 200 yards from the costume shop, and so that was really helpful in developing Nellie's costume for that party, and Lady Faye, we could watch her dance and it was just like to have Justin's
you were in most of the dance rehearsals.
Yeah, and it was so helpful, and having the score there was really inspiring, and so you knew kind of ahead of time what we were going for. And then there was also a little like something that I really kept in my mind was that the amount of real estate that you kind of wanted, some of the things that we were actually building, like if we're going to make a headdress, let's make it take up some amount of architecture, like some amount of space, because it would be helpful in making this room feel very crowded. And so there were several headdresses that we built, and just, it was a group effort though. Like my whole team, I had so many wonderful people on my team that were just going above and beyond what their job description was. And like the chicken was a good example, and there were like 3 or 4 headdresses, and like I said, the spider and you caught glimpses of them. In fact, I've admitted this embarrassingly that I have watched the movie in slow motion because I just needed to I need to see this for a long time and just stare at how beautiful it is. Like, this chicken was unbelievable. It was all like handcrafted and sculpted. And in fact, there is a photo of Damien wearing the chicken.
I will never see the light.
Right, I don't think it got approved, but I have a copy, but I've never given it to anybody. It's so cute. But anyway, just these wonderful things that, when it adds this, layered and just rich feeling at this party of just debauchery and fun, right? Don't you want to go to that party? It was pretty fun shooting it, like Anthony was saying. And but so just to everybody, like I said, people were, are you done with that? Well, we got to finish that headdress and it needs to be glued. And we're every night at rap, it was the costume hospital. Everybody would be rapping and be getting the glue gun out. And oh my gosh, everything's falling apart on this thing. But it was fun to do.
How many changes, do you have a number in your head? I just know it's insane, just changes in the film. How many costumes individually?
I think there's close to 10,000 because there was 7,000 background and we had close to 300 principals and then we made the dancers, that's not including the dancers, and there's dancers in a lot of the different sequences, and there was a lot of costumes, and, a lot of things that we made, and but like I said, I couldn't have done it without my team, and never, everyone was so into it, just like Anthony was saying, never an eye roll. It's just I think everybody knew, we were making something epic, and when is this gonna get a green light again, and this climate, and this is the last opportunity we're ever gonna have to, when are you gonna get to make costumes like this again? And so everybody was all in, and I think that's why.
I think also is that we all work, you dress sets or everything, and it's sometimes you'll dress this, and then you'll see the movie, and you see just the actor's head, and you just see this. And I think with Babylon, just watching the dailies every day, is that you saw it. You would just, there's huge, big shots, and you just see all the work. And for me, it's when you call your team, and you look at the dailies, and you go, look at, all your hard work, you're seeing it. There wasn't anything that we did that we didn't see. I mean, maybe Nelly's house, but you covered that. But other than that, is that you saw the work, and that was that's kind of what kept you going on Babylon, is that we were all working so hard, but you saw it.
Well, I was the luckiest director in the world, honestly. Your guys' sets, your outfits. Justin, but we went to college together, so it's working.
Always fighting for my job.
No, seriously, I was like a kid in a candy shop working with this music, these outfits, and these costumes. You guys are the greatest collaborators I could ever hope to have. So thank you, and thank you.